Okay. In the last class, we have seen, at the outset, thank you for joining on Sunday. We have certain issues about connectivity and account and a lot of work, Mac and all that. So I, I called you on Sunday. But I think attendance is a bit low today. Well, nevertheless, not a problem. In any case, these recordings are available to you on YouTube. Well, so in the last class, we have discussed about the allied sciences of history, like geography and economics, and just 1 minute, please. Okay. Okay. So in the last class, we have seen about allied sciences like geography and economics and literature and so on and so forth. Today we will discuss about auxiliary sciences. So in comparison to the allied sciences, auxiliary sciences are those sciences which generally played supportive role, and their main role is to make our understanding of history better. But nevertheless, they, like in humanities, there cannot be very watertight compartmentalization like we have in sciences. It's a bit fluid subject. That is the reason. Though archaeology, for example, we are calling it as a kind of auxiliary sciences to history, but that may anger an archaeologist. Archaeologists will say that no, archaeology by itself is an independent science, and you just can't term it as a kind of auxiliary only. But okay, nevertheless, in order to understand, this is just a beginning for you being an MA student. There are different debates and there are a lot of controversies in history. But those controversies, if you take it in a right spirit, generally enrich our, generally, it develops our perspective. So, in case of auxiliary sciences, let us start with archaeology. See, we have discussed about no sources are yet to be discussed. Primary and secondary sources we will be discussing later on. So, these archaeological sources, they form one of the important sources on which the history is constructed, and they are considered as a primary sources, very important sources. So, this understanding and study of archaeology, it sharpens our understanding of history. For example, if I want to know, let us say about Rashtrakutas period, and there are certain remains of Rashtrakutas, their forts and their caves and engraving, but I may not understand that, so I have to take the help of a trade archaeologist, and archaeology itself has developed an independent branch of study where we study the old remains, and they give us an understanding. There will be layered, when there is an excavation done, generally there will be a layered kind of structure, one structure or another structure, and they understand those layers when those structures were built, what were the reason behind the destruction of those kind of structure. So that kind of information we get from archaeology. In archaeology we find a lot of sculptures, and by understanding those sculptures we can understand the religious belief of the people. By studying sculpture we can understand that how far the art was developed, because if the art is very well developed, definitely that will reflect in the beautiful sculptures. If the art is in the crude form, probably the sculptures will not be as so beautiful. The building, if it is very finely made, if it is having that aesthetic sense, we can understand that probably it was the era of affluency. The economic condition was pretty better, and so on and so forth. A lot of conclusion can be drawn from the archaeological study, which will help us understanding of history. And related to archaeology, next auxiliary science is numismatics. Now, what is the meaning of numismatic? Anybody, have you heard this word?
Study of coin.
Yeah, very right. Numismatic is a study of coin, and can you guess how much you can understand by studying coins? Coin can give a lot of information. For example, in case of Gupta rulers, significant information has came from coins. Like in case of Ashoka, significant information came from the Ashoka's pillars. But in case of Gupta, a lot of information has came from their coins. Now, what are the things that you can understand from coin? Can you guess? Yes. Yes, you can write also, like in the chat box. Ah, yeah, very right. Rohan Barve has a king religion, king musical interest. Very right, Rohan. That is very very correct. Anything else? Well, okay. For example, if suppose king, let us say, there was a king A, and during that king A's period, a lot of golden coins, economic status, very right. A lot of golden coins were made. But then he is succeeded by his son, whose name was, let us say, B. But during the period of B, the golden coins, the gold that were found in the coin was not as pure as during the regime of King A. And as you go to the next king, that is King C, we find that there is no golden coin at all, only silver and copper coin. So what you can understand by this is that the economic condition during the regime of first king, that is King A, was much better. That is the reason he could use gold for making coins. But economic condition has probably deteriorated. That is the reason there was a contamination of the gold in the gold coins. And then further on, if you go to the next king, he even could not make golden coins, and he has to make only silver coin because there was probably no gold or very less gold available to him. So, deterioration of the economic condition. So, Rohan Barve has said it very rightly. Economic status, economic condition of the kingdom, we can understand. Another thing is that if the shape of the coin is very very neatly, very well rounded shape, then we can understand that probably the artistic development of that king was quite high, because making a very round coin is not an easy task. If you hammer it, the shape of the metal is likely to get distorted. But making a round coin is an indicative of the art was very very proper. Similarly, on the coins there will be different pictures engraved, and by looking at that picture you can understand what was king's religion, what kind of gods king was using. Similarly, for example, on the coin of one Gupta king, there is a picture of his wife Kumar Devi. So you can understand by that point that his queen was extensively respected. Similarly, during the Jahangir's regime, there were coin of Noor Jahan. So we can understand that Noor Jahan was having a lot of influence on the Jahangir's policies. Mm, Similarly, if that picture is very beautifully made, that is also one of the indicator that artistic development has reached to a very high level. At the same time, the extent up to which the coins are found, we can understand that we can, that could be one of the proof, not 100% reliable proof, but that could be one of the proof that probably the coins were in circulation up to this area. For example, if the coins are issued by the king of Delhi, and if they are found even at Aurangabad in Maharashtra, we can understand that probably the empire had extended from Delhi to Aurangabad. Similarly, if there is a lot of gap, for example, lot of gap in the geographical gap between the source of coin. For example, if the lot of Roman coins are found, let us say at Tirunanthapuram, so Rome is a very far away country. So can we just conclude that Tirunanthapuram was conquered by the king of Rome, and the king of Rome, the Tirunanthapuram that is in Kerala in India, Tirunanthapuram was part of Roman kingdom. Can we conclude that? Yes. So what else it could indicate that you find very significant amount of Roman coins at Tirunanthapuram. Rohan Barve said no, it cannot be. So what could be the another interpretation of finding the coins? Yes, anybody? Can you guess? Anyone? Some trader, yeah, very right, Rohan. You seems to be having a good understanding. It's quite indicative that it's quite possible that the people of Tirunanthapuram might have had a trade relation with Roman Empire, and some trader, either of Roman trader or the trader from Tirunanthapuram, was in possession of those Roman coins, and that were somehow got buried, and later on they were being found. So this is the indication of trade relation. So in a way, numismatic can give you a lot of information. Well, now next is important auxiliary science is paleography. Paleography is study of handwriting. For example, if somebody is doing, research on Peshwa's period of later Peshwas, like Madhav Rao and Savai Madhav Rao. And Nana Fadnavis was one of the important character in Maratha history who played a significant role. So if you are doing kind of research on Savai Madhav Rao Peshwe, and somebody comes to you and says that, see, this is later written by Nana Fadnavis, the important character, the person who was very important during that period. Whether that letter is authentic or not, there could be different way to find it. And one of the important way is to study the handwriting, and that is where the paleographist come into picture. Because I may not be expert. I am not aware of Nana Fadnavis's handwriting, but there are people who are paleographists and they are familiar with the handwriting of the important historical character. They become specialists. For example, it's not humanly possible for a one person to become an expert in understanding the handwriting of all the important historical character. That will be expected too much. But there will be a expert paleographist of Maratha history, and who will be knowing the handwriting of the important historical character in Maratha history like Nana Fadnavis. And when you go to him with his letter, he will compare it with Nana Fadnavis' other writing, or he himself will be familiar because of his experience, and then he will immediately give his verdict whether the letter is genuine or it is a fabricated letter. So you have to take the help of paleographists who study handwriting, who are expert in handwriting. So as there are people who are expert in understanding the handwriting written on the paper, there are people who are able to read the inscription. See, reading of the inscription is not an easy task. It is not that just you take a book and you read it. Because epigraphy is reading of inscription. You understand the meaning of inscription? Who doesn't understand? Tell me. Yes. What is inscription? Well, inscription. Yeah. Tell me, anybody. Gayatri.
The study of inscription or epigraphs as a writing deep.
Ha.
Sorry.
Well, okay. Inscriptions are engraved writing. Engraved writing either on the stone pillar or the metal pillar or the metal plate, or it is also done on the leather sheet. On the leather sheet, when you engrave something, that is called inscription. And there are specialists who can study this inscription, and they are called epigraphists. It's difficult for us like who have not done studied, who are not trained to read those things, because over a period of time what happen is that inscription have a tendency to wither away. Similarly, there are inscriptions where there is an inscription already, and on the top of it, somebody has again written an inscription. So that later gets mixed up, and it needs a lot of painful efforts. For example, we will be studying about mm, James Prinsep next semester, and James Prinsep was a person who tried to read Ashoka's inscription, and it took him 7 years before he could read Brahmi. It was written in Brahmi script, and that script people was lost in due course. And he is a person who tried to understand all those letters, and then finally he came out with the Brahmi script. So reading of inscription is quite a difficult task, and you need a specialist. And but those inscription can give you a lot of information, and that is where the epigraphy comes into play as a kind of auxiliary science of understanding history. Then next come philology. Philology is study of language. For example, how the language have developed, how the one word has traveled from one language to another language, how it has undergone changes. It could be a very independent branch of study. For example, I'll give you one very interesting example. There was a Roman king called Julius Caesar, and you might have heard the name, and probably you might have read the drama on Julius Caesar that is written by Shakespeare. So this person Julius Caesar, how the name Caesar came into existence, and do you know the story? Anybody knows the story? How he is called Caesar? Caesar is that is with which we cut something. Yes, anybody? Well, Caesar, nowadays there is a cesarean delivery when there is a threat to the mother while she is delivering a baby. and her stomach is cut open by using Caesar. So we call it a Caesarean delivery, and that child is called Caesarean child. And during those time, it is said that this Julius was born after Caesarean operation to his mother. She developed certain complication during the childbirth, and it was a Caesarean operation, and that is the reason that name Caesar stuck to his name, Julius Caesar. And now, interesting thing is that thereafter, any Roman king who wanted to proclaim himself as a great king used to suffix Caesar along with his name, Julius Caesar, then Augustus Caesar, so on and so forth. Now, this Caesar word became an indicative of the proclamation of the greatness in all over Europe, and the word has traveled to Russia, and it got changed into Tsar. Caesar has become Tsar. You must have heard that Russian king used to be called Tsar. Similarly, the Caesarian word has traveled from Europe to Central Asia. It got incorporated into Persian, and it became Kaisar. And from that Persian, it came to India. That is the reason when the Mughal king used to assume the title of Kaisar-e-Hind, and that was a title which was later on assumed by the Queen Empress of England after 1850, after 58. The revolt of 1858 was suppressed by the Britishers, and British became the paramount power in India. And that is the word Caesar. So, this is a very interesting story, how the word Caesar has traveled to the different part of the world and it got changes. So, if you study, there are expert people who study philology, how the changes came into the words, what kind of language were used by the people, what language are indicative of what words. For example, one word could mean different thing to different people. That is how the philologies come into play. That is where the philology they play a very important role. Philology, by understanding philology, or the philologists can understand that there were different words which were used in the administrative structure, and now they have become surname like Deshmukh, Deshpande in Maharashtra. They were in fact part of the administrative machinery even before Chhatrapati Shivaji. Well, then comes graphology. Graphology is somebody who studied the graph. So by studying the graph, you can that will give you a lot of idea, a lot of information about history. Then there is a term called there are people called sigillographer, or there is a branch of study called sigillography. Sigillography is nothing but a study of seals. For example, at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, we have found lot of seals, that is seals made up of mud, and on that seal there are different pictures are engraved, and the people who study these seals and try to understand the past, they are called sigilographers. Similarly, there is anthropology. Anthropology is someone who try to understand the people by generally that is used for tribal study, but there is an urban anthropology also. So anthropology is a study of anthropo is nothing but human being. So anthropology is generally study of human being, and within the anthropology lot of things comes, but generally the term is used, anthropological study is used. The term anthropological study indicates that you are going and staying with the population, tribal population, for whom the written record are very scarce. बहुत कम written record, written history जिन लोगों की नहीं है, if the people or the particular group of the people tribal doesn't have written history, and if you want to study about them, generally you go and stay with them and you note down your observations, and that is a generally work of anthropologists. But there are urban anthropologists also who try to understand the things like how the internet had affected the relationship. That also comes in within the part of anthropology. So anthropology, where generally anthropology plays a role where we don't have a written record, and this anthropological study can be also very supportive. For example, if you want to not know about tribal history, it's quite possible that you may not find the written record. So you have to become anthropologist, or you have to take the help of anthropologists. So this anthropology will go, he will try to collect the stories, he will try to correct the saying, he will try to understand their festival, and through that festival, through that stories, through that traditional tales, mythological tales many times, we try to understand the past, how these people have lived and how they are carrying the memory of history in their minds. So that is the work done by anthropologists. And then there is a there is also demography. Demography is study of population. We try to understand the population and in particular area, how many male and females are there, how many people are educated, how many people are matriculate, how many people are having higher income, lower income, or middle income. So that kind of study of population comes under the demographical study, which is also an important tool to understanding of history. And then comes genealogy. Genealogy is study of dynasty. We study that Babur, Humayun was son of Babur, and then Akbar was son of Humayun. So that genealogical sequence is genealogy is also an important branch of study which supports our understanding of history. So these are the different auxiliary sciences that we have studied so far. Now tell me, do you have any doubt about auxiliary sciences? Yes.
No, sir.
Well, okay, it was a relatively easy topic, I think, not that difficult. Okay, fine. And now we still have time, guys, and our next topic is that is primary and secondary sources. So this primary and secondary sources, it is not a very big topic. In fact, there is a little bit of information, little bit of definition about the what is primary and what is secondary sources, and what is its relative importance in study. So shall we go ahead and do that as well? Are you in a mood? Today is Sunday, and I called you guys. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So I think if we do that, our first unit will be over. So I'll share that PPT with you. Oh well, I hope you are able to see this new PPT, primary and secondary sources.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So sources are very important for construction of history. Historian cannot construct history without sources. He has to collect these sources, and these sources, broadly speaking, are categorized into two categories: primary and secondary. Now, can you guess if you have not already gone through the Word file that I have put in the Google Classroom yesterday? Well, even if you have gone through, you can speak or you can just tell me what is called primary sources. Tell me. Yes, yes, you can write in the chat. Yes, what is primary? Tell me. You can should guess. Make a guess also. Not a problem. No, no.
Sir, primary sources are artifacts, documents.
Uh-huh. Uh, well, artifact is fine, but documents. Which kind of documents? Yeah, manuscript.
So,
Yeah.
like diaries, letters.
What is that? Repeat, please.
Sir, documents means like diaries, letters.
Yeah. Right. Okay. You definitely you have a bit of idea. So that it's not going to be a very tough topic. It's in fact very easy. Little bit of sharpening of our understanding of these two terms we will be doing now. So in the primary sources, all archaeological remains, all the old building remains, all monuments, all coins, sculptures, they all are considered as primary sources. We have just now studied about numismatic and archaeology. So numismatic and archaeology, they primarily epigraphies, all that engraving, they all are coming under the primary sources. Similarly, as you said, diaries, if a person writes his own autobiography, then that is also primary source. Similarly, if a person writes about an event in which he was involved, then that also becomes the primary source. For example, if somebody who has participated in the Battle of Panipat, or somebody who has participated in the freedom struggle against the British, so that source becomes the primary source if you are studying that particular event. Similarly, even if the person has not participated, but he had been witness to the event. For example, it's quite possible that somebody has not participated in the freedom struggle, but he had lived through that era. He was witness to the happening, and then his account will also become the primary sources. So account written by contemporary person who has witnessed those actions, who has witnessed those historical episode. And these primary sources can be in a published work. For example, letters of Nana Fadnavis or the letters of Bajirao Peshwa. If they are published, they can be also primary sources. But you have to take care that the publisher or the editor who has collected those letters, there could be some error in editing, there could be some error in publishing. Similarly, translation is also considered as primary sources. For example, I study Mahabharata, and but my Sanskrit is not that good. So what I do is I refer to the English translation. So that English translation of Mahabharata is also a primary source. But here also we have to take care that sometimes the translation, there could be certain error in the translation. So the primary sources, very important thing you should remember is that there is no confusion about archaeology, coins, and the inscriptions. They are primary sources, so it's not going to be any confusion. There could be some confusion in the written sources. So written sources can be of two type, primary and secondary. But written sources becomes primary source if it is an autobiography and if you are studying about that person. For example, Mahatma Gandhi has written his autobiography, and if your research area is Mahatma Gandhi, then that becomes your primary source. But if you are writing, on Hinduism, and if you want to understand what Mahatma Gandhi has said about Hinduism, then it is quite possible that Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography will become your secondary source, because so there is a bit of flexibility somewhere. Same. One more example I'll give you. For example, Dr. Ambedkar, if Dr. Ambedkar's opinion about religion, let us say, if that is your main research area, then Dr. Ambedkar's writing about religion and Dr. Ambedkar's all writing becomes your primary source. But if your research area is caste system, then it is quite possible that Dr. Ambedkar's opinion about caste system that you are studying, so Dr. Ambedkar's writing may become your secondary source. So there is a bit of flexibility in certain cases when the primary sources become secondary sources and vice versa. Well, so primary sources are clear. Now secondary sources are mainly those sources that we generally read to begin with, that is books that is based on primary sources, books that is based on the archaeological finding, books that is based on the primary writing like autobiographical writing or the writing of those people who were involved. Now what is the importance of this primary and secondary sources relatively? Primary sources written now, of course that archaeological remains are very important because you cannot alter it. Once the building is constructed, it will remain as it is until unless somebody does the modification. But there is a very less possibility of tampering with those kind of archaeological remains. Coins will remain as it is until unless some person with a destructive mind destroys it or hammer it, but you cannot alter the primary archaeological remains. It will remain as it is. In case of written sources, the importance of written primary sources is that it is a first-hand account of the eyewitness, the person who has participated in the event. Archaeological remains, it remains unaltered. So, in case of written primary sources, you get a first-hand account. Now, what is the importance of secondary sources? If the primary sources are important, then why do we need secondary sources at all? If you are going for research, where do we start? Will you start with the secondary source or will you start with the primary source? Yes. Tell me or put in the chat box what is your opinion. Just make a guess. I mean, until unless you guess, tax your brain, your understanding. Primary source. Okay, Shahili has written. Everybody agrees with Shahili. Are you going to start with secondary, Rohan? Well, Rohan, any justification? Why should we start with secondary source? Yes. Well, well, okay, guys. I'll tell you. I'll tell you my own example. I'll share my own example. As well, first we have to gather information. Okay, Rohan, you're quite close. Almost correct. Well, okay, fine. See, when I started doing my research on Bhakti tradition of Maharashtra, if I directly go to the primary source, like if I start reading Ganeshwari, so from Ganeshwari, I'll start, and then I will discover the writing of Namdeva. If you are familiar with the Marathi Sant, and then I will discover the writing of Eknatha, and then I will discover the writing of let us say Tukarama and Ramdasa. So these steps I will. If I directly start reading Ganeshwari first, I will not be knowing that what writings of Namdeva are there, what writings of Tukaram are there, and what writing of Ramdasa is there. But if I read a secondary source first, that is a book which is written on the Bhakti tradition, that will give me a bit of bird's eye view, that will give me a bit of comprehensive idea that I have to start with Ganeshwara and I have to stop at Ramdasa. But if I directly go to and start reading Ganeshwari, which is a very huge text itself, probably I will be lost, and I will not be able to in a position, that blueprint will not be ready in my mind. See, when you construct a house, before starting, before digging your plinth, you need to have a blueprint ready. So with the help of the blueprint, you know in which direction you are going. So you must start with the secondary source, and that is the importance of secondary source. Secondary source gives you an comprehensive account of the subject. Maybe in short, definitely primary sources might give you much more information if the literature is available. Like in my subject, lot of literature was available. It gives you bird's eye view, and bird's eye view is very important. And then secondary sources, reading of secondary source will also give you the methods of interpreting the primary source, because when I read secondary sources, it has some kind of cognition, some kind of understanding has come to my mind how those primary sources are to be interpreted. Otherwise, without that training, if I directly go and read Ganeshwari, I will be struggling how to interpret Ganeshwari and how to write my finding. But I know that some person has already done it, little bit of knowledge. So this secondary reading of secondary sources will not complete my research definitely, but it will give me certain direction, certain blueprint, certain understanding, certain tools by which I'll be able to interpret the primary sources in a better manner. But so this is the importance of secondary sources. It gives you comprehensive account. It gives you ways and method of interpreting primary sources. It gives you kind of a bird's eye view. So you have started your research with secondary sources. You got a blueprint ready in your mind, and then you study primary sources, and then you enrich your finding. You write all the chapters. Then is your research complete? No, you have to read the secondary sources once again. So the ideally speaking, the way of proceeding with the research is that read the secondary sources, at least few if not all, then go for study of primary sources, because without studying of the primary sources, your research will not be complete. Research that is entirely dependent on the secondary sources is not considered as a very good research. You read the primary sources, and that is where your interpretation of these two has already been written, it's compiled up, and now you read the secondary sources once again. Might be the same sources or some additional secondary sources. So that secondary sources will do two things now. It will reinforce the finding. You will understand that you were going in the right direction. For example, what you have concluded, what findings you have done, they are being similar to that finding. People have already mentioned it. Secondly, that if you have missed certain point, that you will also understand by reading the secondary sources after studying the primary sources. So you understood now the importance of primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are first hand account. Secondary sources are important because they will give you a comprehensive idea about the topic that you are dealing with, and they will give you different tools and different ways of interpreting the sources. So where to start research? This I have already done. You have to start with secondary sources. Now next is, as primary sources are very important, and without primary sources your research will not be complete. But tell me one thing, is everything written in the primary sources is true? Shall we take it as a true? Yes. Yes or no?
No, sir.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Sahili, Rohan, you both are saying no. Any reason? Any reason? Yes.
Sir, first we should examine that whether it is true or giving the right information or not.
Right. Right. Very right. Because the person who has written primary sources might be having his vested interest. He might be having his limitations. He might have witnessed the Battle of Panipat, but it is quite possible that he is writing after, let us say, a few years after that. And yeah, Rohan is again right. Have people have different opinion. He might be writing few years after that. And similarly, it's not possible for a one person to be present everywhere. The battle was taking place at a very extensive area, and how can he be present at various places at the same time? He might be placed in one corner of the battlefield where he has witnessed, but at what is happening at another side, he is only hearing it. Somebody is bringing the news, he is only hearing it. So all those primary sources, everything written in the primary sources cannot be taken as true. That need to be verified. For example, take the case of newspaper. Newspapers are considered generally as a primary sources because it gives information about the contemporary event. So if you read the newspaper of 50 years back, those that has become your primary sources. If you read the newspaper of British period, again that has become your primary sources. But everything written in the newspaper, you cannot take it granted because newspaper have their own propaganda. They have their own ideas to propagate particular ideas. They subscribe to particular ideology. So that is the reason everything written in the primary sources you cannot take it as true. And in case of primary sources, there are different challenges. There are challenges to interpret primary sources. For example, you need to know the language, and if you don't have the mastery over the language, you have to rely on translation, and there could be a mistake. The translator may have his own vested interest, his own opinion. You need special skill. For example, Maratha political correspondence of the Marathas were mostly written in the Modi script, and we read Marathi in Devanagari script. So there is a challenge. We need special skill to interpret Modi. Otherwise, we have to take help of the specialists. Similarly, there could be error in publishing and editing and translation. So these are the challenges when we interpret the primary sources. The primary sources and secondary sources can become interchangeable. This I have already told you. For example, Dr. Ambedkar's writing on Hinduism. I repeat again, if your primary research area is Hinduism, probably Dr. Ambedkar's opinion may form as a secondary source. But if your research area is Dr. Ambedkar himself, Dr. Ambedkar's opinion about Hinduism, if that itself is your research area, probably Dr. Ambedkar's writing will become your primary source. So this is the primary and secondary source. Do you have any doubt about this? Was a very small topic, uh, just to give you an idea about what is primary and secondary source and what are they really important. And especially if you are studying ancient India, where the secondary sources are scarce, the primary sources become more important. Your archaeological findings and all, they become more important if you want to do that kind of study. If you are doing textual study, Vedas are already there. If your focus is on Veda, like I focus my study, though it ancient India Mahabharata I am studying now, but it is mostly a textual study. Generally, I don't go for any field work. It's a textual interpretation, what is called hermeneutics. We'll be studying that later on. It is internal and external criticism. It comes later in your syllabus. But here, I think the first unit is over probably. If you have any doubt about the first unit, we have done with the first thing that we have done with is what is the meaning of historiography that we have done. Then we have tried to understand the nature and scope of history, and after that we have done the allied and auxiliary sciences of history, and now we have done with primary and secondary sources of history. So this core topic comprises of your first unit. So our first unit is over here now. I'll take your attendance. Meanwhile, if you have any doubt, you can put in the chat box. You may ask as well. निदा, आप हिंदी मीडियम से हो ना, निदा?
ये हिंदी मीडियम।
हाँ, लेकिन आपको लेक्चर समझ में आया? कोई दिक्कत तो नहीं होती है?
हाँ हाँ सर, समझ में आया।
हाँ हाँ हाँ,
नो
ठीक
सर,
है,
मेरे को कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं।
कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं ना। हाँ, अगर दिक्कत होती है समझने में तो आप मुझे बोल भी सकते हैं, चैट बॉक्स में भी डाल सकते हैं, कोई इंग्लिश का वर्ड समझ में नहीं आया तो, है ना? क्योंकि हिंदी तो सबको आती है, तो आई विल बी, इफ हिंदी मीडियम
हाँ ठीक
स्टूडेंट्स
है
आर,
सर, ओके।
हाँ, हिंदी मीडियम स्टूडेंट्स आर देयर, आई विल बी बाइलिंगुअल थोड़ा। अगर समझ में आता है तो फिर वेल एंड गुड, फिर मेरा फ्लो डिस्टर्ब नहीं होगा।